And we're recording. Okay, welcome everyone to the October 8th SIG Apps meeting. My name is Adnan Abdul Hussain. I'll be chairing us through this today. I'm pasting a link to the agenda document here that we use, and you can follow along to the agenda here. So we don't have any announcements to start off with today, so unless anyone else has anything they'd like to shout out about, we can move on to our first demo. Okay, that sounds like that's a no. So our first demo is of Kubernetes. Aviv, are you around to?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. So let me try to share my screen.
Great.
Can you see the presentation now?
We can, yeah.
Okay,
All right,
cool.
take it away.
So Kubernetes is basically an automatic rollback system for Kubernetes. It's a very simple one, very naive, but it's our first shot to try to solve this issue. So let me describe a little bit the problem. As you all know, CI/CDs are basically the standards right now, and system rolling up many times a day, even for small organization, not to say for large organization with microservices architectures. There's a lot of deployments through the day. And humans need to monitor it to respond to a decision whether or not this list is good or bad, and whether or not to roll back and to do the actual rollbacks. Rollbacks are done manually, and they're not quick enough because a human needs to watch, human needs to react, and to make the decision, and then find the previous image, do the deployment again, and it can take time, money, and downtime if something goes wrong during a manual process. So Kubernetes is very simple. Basically, it's watch metrics, user-defined metrics. We to define them. Currently, it supports Stackdriver and Datadog, but basically, you only have to supply one function that return whether or not you should, the metric is okay or not. And that's it. We're reverting to the previous version. We can watch multiple deployments in multiple namespaces. It's all done via configuration, and the configuration is done using CRD. In order to preserve states in case if Kubernetes is going down, we're using annotation on the deployments themselves for state management, whether or not we are watching, and for how long we are watching, because you don't want to watch forever. You probably want to watch for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe an hour. So it's also defined by the user. And once the timeout once the watch period is expired, we are not longer watching it. We support what I call the cascading deployments, meaning if you deploy, you're doing the deployment and start watching it for an hour, and during that hour, you're redeploying because someone has a new feature. So we support it. We stop watching the previous deployment and start watching the new one, and it's run in the kube system namespace. This is an example of the CRD. Basically, for watch period, for how long it minutes to watch, what is the metric source, is it Stackdriver or Datadog? And in each namespace that we want to watch, you provide a list of deployment, the name of the deployment, the name of the metrics. It's a different syntax for Stackdriver and for Datadog. In the deployment tool, we put in a net metric name that suits Datadog, and what is the threshold. And basically, that's it. Current limitation, we only support rolling update strategy. For metrics, we only check greater than, and we support only pods rollback, no support for database schemas, etc. Here are the links for the code, the blog post, and the demo video of it. So let me switch over to the demo. Hopefully it will work. So can you see my screen now? It's a different screen. Can you see my terminal? Hello?
We can still see your screen. Yeah. We see terminals.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's an application that's running. As you can see, it's version 1 and everything is good. Let's deploy a different version of the application. As you can see, we're getting some errors. And on the top left panel, we're starting a watch metric, starting to watch. Could take too long, I'll just stop the video. And now we're starting the rollback. And as you can see, we're reverted to version 1. And basically, that's it.
It's pretty
Any
cool.
questions?
Thanks, Viv. Does anyone have any questions?
You said this was for deployments?
Yes. So it supports multiple pods in one deployment.
Does it deploy things other than deployments, or at the moment is it deployments?
Just deployments. We wanted to test the water and see if people are using it and get the feedback.
So there's a question here of, are there any plans on supporting the application CRD?
Sorry, you were breaking up.
There was a question in chat, in text. It says, any plans on supporting application CRD?
We don't have such plans, but just open an issue on our GitHub, and if there is a demand, we'll do it. We just wanted to test the water. If there is demand and feature requests, we'll be happy to apply them.
Okay.
So we're open.
Yeah, I could see this being useful for things other than the deployments, although I do see it useful there. Maybe even in grouping of collection of assets around an application, because sometimes you'll have maybe a config map or a secret and a deployment and maybe some other things all grouped together in an application rather than a single asset. But these are just ideas. Yeah, I like your idea of going after what people ask for. But I think automated rollbacks are a worthy thing, because you're right about catching issues and trying to respond to them quickly.
Good. So if you want anything, just create an issue and try to add it. Thank you.
Cool, thanks a lot. All right, so we can move on to the discussion topics. So we have the workloads API discussion today. There's one thing on this list, but if anyone wants to bring up anything else, we can also discuss that. So there's daemon sets, upgrades and downgrades are broken, and it's linked to an issue here. Does someone have any?
Ken, are you on? If you're on, we can't hear you. You're muted. I know Ken was running a few minutes late, and that was his line item, was to talk about the workloads API and the daemon sets.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So yeah, there was an update made to pod spec in a somewhat backward incompatible way. And what happens is when you upgrade, you're fine. If you upgrade and then you create a daemon set and then you downgrade, your daemon set will probably do a rolling update if rolling update is enabled. And it would cause all the daemon sets to do it simultaneously. So what we're looking at right now is trying to get agreement to try to get this change to work in a way that's backward compatible so that if you downgrade it, it's not going to be in your pod spec. And that's kind of what's in play. So that's not out in the wild yet. That would just be on master, which would go into 113.
So Ken, I was trying to look into that as well. I think there might be other cases where this can be broken than just the downgrade and upgrade. Because if you are, say, doing a rolling update and having old master controllers and new API server, I think you can just go in a loop creating controller revisions or something like that, because you send the request without that, it will default to true and it won't match like the new controller.
Sure.
So this may not be isolated to that issue that's just described there, which doesn't seem that serious for some people. I guess you're.
I mean, we weren't able to actually reproduce it during upgrade. We reproduced it on downgrade. There is some anomalous behavior on upgrade, if I remember correctly, but downgrade is where you actually see the unintentional restarts, like basically a ton of unintentional disruptions. My concern was more that it might also be applicable to stateful set.
Yeah, I think this goes in general, because in all of that, we just compare the pod spec with whatever is in the workload object, right? So
Yeah.
I would assume this is applicable to all those resources.
The only ones I think it will actually affect are stateful set and daemon set for workloads API. I don't think it should cause rolling updates for anything else.
Sorry, I didn't get you. Could you repeat that?
The only thing that I don't think it would actually cause any strange behavior anywhere else, but it's a non-backward compatible change either way. So there is a way we think we could do it in a backward compatible way, and we're just going to see if we can get, I believe the feature is primarily kubelet oriented, get Node to agree to change their wording and their implementation so that basically it defaults to not being anything, and that indicates enabled, and then just change the wording so instead of enable it'll be disable, and then you set it to false if you explicitly want to set it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this was, right, this was for 112, and it already went out with that API change. So have you talked to some guys about changing it after? Because it's already in the API, right? Or that's for 113? I'm not sure.
I believe this is just for 113, right, Martin? Yeah, it didn't actually roll out in 112 yet, so it's not released.
This is Aisha from the SIG release team. So for 113, I'm trying to understand what is pending for this work. Are we going to release something in 113, or is it just a bug level fix?
It's based on a feature, I'm assuming. I'm not sure what the feature is, but it's not a workloads feature. It would be a node feature. So
I see.
Basically, we just have to communicate with them and see if we can't re-engineer this API change to make it backward compatible.
Okay. So if one of you could just update the bug there to just say which feature it is, I just wanted to make sure that feature is there in our in the features repo for 113, and then we can coordinate that way.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. And I also pasted a link to the release blocking dashboard, and we are seeing the failures only in the upgrade tests as of now, not in the downgrade ones.
Well, the test failure that's presenting there is less of a problem to end users than the scenario we're talking about where it would actually potentially hurt them, right? So the test failure is caused by something different. Basically, it's just, it can no longer detect controller revisions on the upgrade, which causes the test to fail, which is what kind of raised the concern in the first place. But ultimately, that behavior isn't going to be highly disruptive to a user's clusters on upgrade. What would be like, you shouldn't see any problems until you actually update the daemon set, and that wouldn't be a problem. You would just be rolling forward with an update to your daemon set. If you upgrade and then downgrade, you get unintentional rolling updates, which is an actual problem, would probably be a problem for most users. Not that downgrades are something that we see a lot. It's just that it's a feature of the software that should in general work. And for people who do manage their own Kubernetes clusters and, you know, do potentially have a need to downgrade, we shouldn't disable them from doing so in a safe way.
Got it. Okay. Okay. I'll follow up more on the bug as you guys update the status, just to make sure that we wrangle this in 113.
Cool. Okay. The one other thing I wanted to talk about is potentially cron jobs to GA. Like, what do we think about doing this?
Has anyone rewritten them to shared informers or something like that? Because I don't think without that they can do GA at all.
So nobody's put it on shared informers. Do we think that's a prerequisite for GA in it? Like, is the performance such? Hello?
I'm not sure if Maciej is here today, but I bet he would have comments there because he had a lot of bug reports or performance issues he heard about using cron jobs. So I can definitely let him know about that, but last time I talked to him, he said this has to be rewritten to shared informers first before it can go to GA because there are issues with it.
Okay, I kind of agree with that, but moving it, the one thing that's not clear to me is for the API perspective, I think we're okay with the API. Like, I don't see a lot of requests to change it other than the one feature request to add time zone support, which got kicked up the SIG architecture, and we fundamentally decided we are not going to do that. Because basically we don't want to carry a database, the IANA database, around in every Kubernetes distribution. It kind of changes the meaning of what a Kubernetes distribution is actually. So from an API perspective, I don't see a lot of problems or issues or things that we should be adding or removing prior to taking it to GA. The shared informers is more of a stability thing. So I think maybe we should prioritize in the near future getting it implemented just so that once that goes in, we're going to want to soak that for at least a release or two before calling it GA. So if we want to try to get the thing GA in 2019 timeframe, we got to start thinking about implementing the shared informers like sooner rather than later. I mean, if we don't do it in Q4, okay, short quarter anyway, short release cycle, 113. I mean, as far as I know, 112, nobody's really got that in prod yet to begin with. 113, short cycle, it's going to come right on the heels of 112, and there's been a lot of updates to 112 in that release process. Maybe we don't touch it in Q4, but I think by Q1, we want to be thinking about a plan going forward to get it implemented if we want to GA it in 2019. And it's kind of the last thing on the workloads API that's still in beta. And at least from what I see in the community, it's actually more popular than Job is. Like, people use cron job all the time. Stripe's built infrastructure on top of it. Like, it's a fairly popular feature. So prioritizing getting it to GA is something I'd like to do in the near future.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Cron job is pretty popular.
Yeah, I get all that. I guess it depends if we just want to say it's if we say it's GA, I guess it's not just the API, but the feature should be generally stable even on the implementation side.
Right. And like if we're going to put shared informers in, adding a cache is always a risk. So sneaking that in under users' heads, I don't know about that. Like I'd rather add the cache first if we're going to do it. And it's not like I don't see a reason not to use shared informers if we think we can do it in a stable way. I think we can.
I think last time I talked to Maciej, the main issue was time, and he was engaged in so many other things that he just didn't pursue it further.
Yeah, maybe we can.
I'll talk to him how he feels about it and bring him to the follow-ups conversations we have. Yeah. So let's maybe have this on the next agenda and we can discuss it further. And I will try to ask Maciej to join and tell us about the issues he sees there.
What?
Yeah, we have Code Slush coming November 9th. And so we may not be able to get this in because we have the shortened window in fourth quarter. But it would be really nice to figure out how to get cron job to GA for 114.
I think that's ambitious.
For 114, do you think getting it to GA by 114 would be ambitious?
Yeah, if you're gonna add shared informers, so if we say we're gonna ship what we have and call that GA, that would be fine. But I don't think people are generally comfortable doing that. We want to add shared informers, which is going to add a caching layer between the controller and the API server. Distributed systems in general and Kubernetes in specific, caching layers are hard. So before we call it GA and tell users that, okay, it's done, it's ready, it's a rock, you can depend on it, we probably want to see it soak with the shared informers for at least one release, if not two, just to make sure everything is, ready to go. Like the way I would plan it would be something more like if we can get the shared informers in Q4 or Q1, let it soak for 1 quarter at a minimum, as still in beta. If we don't see any error reports, if it continues to be stable for our users, if there's no issues with it, then you can consider promoting it immediately in the next release. If we see other break fix that's happening due to the introduction of the cache or just break fix in general, and we don't feel it's stable enough, then you slide it 1 release. So plan it for 2 out, and you can move it forward in the event that, you just hit it out the ballpark on the first go around when you put the shared informers in. In the event that you take 2 quarters to do it, that's fine too. If you promise for 2 quarters and hit it in 1, no one will be upset with you. If you promise for 2 and hit it in 2, you held up your end of the bargain anyway. I don't see any need to be aggressive going to GA as opposed to being cautious.
No, that makes sense. As long as we've got a path for it, I think the important thing is really a path for it because cron job has been sitting around for quite a while without having a path towards GA release. And if we switch it to some kind of track where we're actively working towards it, I think that alone will make people happy.
Yeah, I think the primary contributors to it have been very busy doing other things across the project, so there's been a little bit of that there. It's been good enough that people haven't been complaining about it hugely. We've had other issues with job and object quota that have taken more time than cron job. So, I get why. And then we know what we need to do. I just don't think we formalized that in the issue and said, here's the tracking plan for GA, and then just gone forward with that. The only thing I don't have a good grip on, I think Maciej might have a better grip on, is do we think the API is exactly where it needs to be? Like, I feel good about it, but I would like other feedback. I haven't gotten any negative feedback, but I would like to have a more thorough consensus of that before we say, okay, we're gonna promote it.
Yeah, I agree with Ken that this needs time, and I'm going to bring Maciej next time so he can share his experience with it because I haven't really worked with it much.
Yeah, and he shouldn't feel pressured to be the only one implementing shared informers. If he's busy doing other things that are important, we can probably get some other cycles from the community in order to help it. Granted, it's tricky, so it's not something that we'd like to put out like a request for help for your first contribution, but I think we can find somebody in the community who can help move it forward. I think the thing is just to at least initially decide, here's what we want to do and here's a timeline we're trying to hit, and then we can figure out resourcing in order to support that timeline after that.
Yeah, sure. I meant it more like he will bring the experience and he will know how he felt about the API and what the issues was.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's leading 6 CLI, so I think he's low on time as well. But
so
we can discuss it next time as well.
This does bring up kind of an important thing, though, of how we build up more people who are capable of contributing to the controllers, in particular in this case. Like if I went to look for documentation on what's going on with shared informers, how they're used, how they're being added, is there much written so that somebody who even wanted to understand what was going on, maybe not even write it, could dig into those details?
Yes, there is. So like if you go, there's example controller and API machinery, and there's examples of how to build a custom API server, how to use CRDs, and how to integrate shared informers and work queues, which are generally used across all of the controllers into those types of projects. That being said, there's lots of gotchas with the caching and how it actually works. And like, yes, it uses pointers everywhere, but because Golang doesn't have const pointers, you can mutate them, and if you do mutate them, you're probably going to cause a cache error. There's just lots of little gotchas that probably aren't necessarily well documented or made particularly explicit, and we might be able to do better there. But I think one of the things that is positive as Kubi Builder and Operator Kit and those projects for building custom controllers and CRDs become more prevalent, and you see people doing things like KubiDB or building these custom controllers on top of Kubernetes, that helps provide more examples and more expertise of how to build a controller. So that helps. Now for the core ones, they've evolved over time, and they're a little bit more complicated to get into just because of some of the nuances. I don't know how, for a new person, I could ask some of the newer guys who've joined, like, how approachable are they? I haven't seen people onboard and struggle insanely, but I mean, those are people who are dedicating a large portion of their time just to understanding how they work. I don't know how approachable it is for somebody who wants to be a novice, who's like, I just want to come in and make a couple of contributions. That might be a lot harder. And I'm not sure, you know, I'm not a DevRel person or a DevX person. I'm not sure how we can make that easier, but be open to suggestions.
Yeah, and some of it is just folks understanding what's going on, even without being able to do it, the concepts. Like I'm going through API machinery code and looking for documentation or anything on this that explains how all of it is intended to work. And that's an area that's a shortcoming. Although this is something I'll probably carry over to the contributor experience folks. But the lack of conceptual documentation to help people wrap their minds around what should be happening makes it difficult for new folks to come in.
Well, to be fair, for workloads, we can probably start being a bit more, if we have rough edges for the developer experience, we probably can start addressing that now. For API machinery, because it's still moving very, very fast, like after V1, we slowed down a little bit. API machinery is still moving extremely fast. So it seems to me, even when they try to document what's going on, it changes so rapidly that it's hard to keep up. Like going back 2 years, there were no custom resource definitions. There were third-party resources. Then those disappeared. And then we added extension API servers, which really changes the way the API server works, because now it can communicate with other API servers to forward stuff through. And actually end up breaking some things in Controller Manager in interesting ways, which we have to clean up. Then we added CRDs and got rid of TPRs. Like all of these fundamental architectural changes in how the machinery actually functions are just ongoing and continuous. Like server-side apply is going to be a huge thing. Dry run is a huge thing. They're just taking off large chunks of scope and changing the way things work so rapidly that documenting it is probably hard. And like even just staying up to date and staying conceptually aware of what's going on there is kind of difficult. But that shouldn't stop us from doing better.
Okay, that's all I had for interrupting. Sorry about that with the whole cron job thing. But it sounds like maybe we can get shared informers in soon if we can make that work. And in 2 weeks when we come back to Workloads API, we can talk more about it, we think?
Sure. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to discuss on Workloads API?
Yeah, I don't at this point.
Okay. All right. We'll loop back in 2 weeks.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
There's also the jobs board. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but there was a particular board for posting to find people to help with certain things.
There is a label. There's like a help needed label that you can add to issues. I'm not sure how prevalent in use that is. Like, I don't know if people are actually picking those up. I mean,
the role board is what I was thinking of.
I'll say one thing for apps. In general, we've been pretty good about addressing broken things and keeping our tests green, and when they're not green, understanding why. So we haven't done a lot of this needs like major attention externally, because we've been focused primarily on core stability more than we have around new features for a while now. So we dedicate most of our effort there. But if we do have things that we could come up with something for SIG Apps in particular, or the Workloads API, if we do have things in the community that people want to get help with or need to get help with, we can come up with a thing that does that works for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can definitely look into it.
Is there any update on the application CRD?
So I can tell you some stuff that we've been kind of working on. So one thing we've been talking about a lot is how to correctly interpret application status. And we're working on implementing a controller that computes application status based on the types of things that the application selects. So we'd like to get that done in the near term. We're not tied to Kubernetes releases, so we don't have to like put it into like a 114 or a 113 plan, but that's something we'd like to get done. And we've been talking a lot with the API machinery, apps lifecycle guys, trying to get some. So like we know what it means for a deployment to be ready. Basically, we have good notions on what it means for readiness for a stateful set, and for a daemon set, and for a pod, and for a replication controller. But CRDs are kind of what architecturally the community is kind of moving toward. They're encouraging things to be outside of core and to use custom resources to represent their state. So the API machinery guys are trying to come up with some best practices about how status should be represented inside of custom resources in order to communicate workload readiness. And we'd like to adopt that as well, because our strong belief is that as Kubernetes evolves and as we work towards a more stable core and experimentation in custom resources and add-ons, we're going to see more and more CRDs, and interoperating correctly with applications is probably going to require some level of standardization around communicating status via CRDs into the application as well. So that's what we're kind of talking about now.
Would it still be a roll-up, or would there's be a status per installed component?
We're thinking roll-up right now. So you roll the status up, potentially aggregating, and primarily using conditions, right? Like so phase is okay, though it's mostly deprecated because we don't want people to do state machines. That's kind of been the thinking behind it. Conditions are generally always okay. So we're thinking of readiness as it's represented in terms of applications as being a condition that's incorporated into the status. And in the same way, a deployment or a replica set can incorporate multiple conditions simultaneously to communicate a more in-depth meaning of like a rollout or whether it's ready. We would like to do the same thing in the application. Then the other consideration, which we'll probably talk more in SIG Apps about later, would be, do we want to add conditions like deployment has to stateful set and daemon set? So right now I can get well, it's not called readiness in the scope of a deployment, it's availability. The availability of a deployment, it can generally be assessed by looking directly at the availability condition on the deployment object itself. If that's a pattern we want to support, we might want to add those types of conditions to stateful set and daemon set as well. Now this can be done in a backward compatible way because basically status is reconstructible on the fly, and the constraints for mutating status throughout releases are actually looser than mutating spec. We added conditions as a type to stateful set and daemon set prior to V1 because we anticipated at some point we would add some conditions to them. Right now, we don't populate them at all. So we'll probably have a proposal in the near future after having some more talk with API machinery about potentially adding some conditions to those API objects as well.
So, and would that propagate to a assembly phase of pending?
No, the assembly phase is on the spec of the application, and that communicates to the application controller from the perspective of the installation tool, whether it's been completely assembled, right? So that's like when whatever is assembling the application says, okay, you're done, or actually by default says nothing, you're assembled. If you say in progress, it's communicating that I'm still assembling you. If it moves it to successful or removes it, okay, you're done.
Oh,
that's
okay.
on the spec. This would be communicated by the controller back to any client via the status field of the application CRD.
Okay. And then the roll-up of status, would there be a way to just auto-discover the failing component? Or?
That's the plan. Like basically the status would, so for a component of the application that has a status, it would communicate back, okay, here's the status of this component, here's the namespace, and here's the name of it. You could use that to go detect the component directly. But it's not going to do a complete full roll-up aggregating all status fields of every object, because the feedback we got there was that that's too much and it's kind of like not the Kubernetes API style. Like you should communicate that something's broken, you should communicate that something's available and give coordinates to go find it again, but don't copy the entire status field of that object into the application.
Oh, okay. And I guess that has to do with the health deployment field. Is the spec moving, like how does the spec move forward? Is there this group, or how where does that work continue?
Here, if you have suggestions that you'd like to add to spec, you can always open up an issue. Here's the right place to discuss it.
Okay.
Yeah. Or PRs are always welcome as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Should we move on to Aish? Did you want to give an update on the Kubernetes 113 timeline?
Sure. Actually, we covered most of the ground here. As I've updated in the doc, it's more of, it's a very short timeline. We only have about 6 weeks for feature planning and coding. So the feature freeze is on 15th of November. So, and we are starting our feature collection starting today. So I don't see any enhancements planned from apps on the spreadsheet yet. So if you guys want to go ahead and add anything that you think is doable in the 113 timeframe, please go ahead and do that. The other question I had was around the daemon set open bug, but we discussed enough about it. So I'll just follow up offline.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, we have a little bit of time left for open discussion, about 15 minutes. So if there's anything else anyone wants to bring up, that would be a good time. Or if there isn't anything else, we can just end a little bit early. Okay, sounds like that's all for today. In which case, we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Have a good week, everyone.